Thank you very much, Donna. Yes, we're getting warmed up now for our session, which will finish the day, and that's talking about a topic that, frankly, makes me rather uneasy: the future of warfare. Now, as a parent, as a citizen, as someone who prefers conversations about peace to preparedness for war, it's hard to accept that this is the world in which we live. But talk about war we must, what it means and what it demands of all of us. From the battlefields of Ukraine to the Middle East, to ongoing and increasingly forgotten conflicts in Sudan and Congo, and tensions in the South China Sea, the defense expert world is watching and trying to learn. And today, we get to learn with four of the brightest minds in the field. First of all, we have on my right Dr. Bastian Giegerich, the Director General of the International Institute for Strategic Studies. Welcome. Dr. Kathleen McInnis from the Center on Strategic and International Studies and formerly of the Pentagon. Dr. Tim Sweijs, Director of Research at one of our institutional partners, the Hague Center for Strategic Studies, and Dr. Olivier Schmitt, Professor and Head of Head of Research at Institute for Military Operations at Danish Defense College. You're all professors, I guess, actually. I only said you were a professor.
I think I'm the only one, actually.
We're all doctors.
You're all doctors.
We're
Safe hands.
Okay. Okay, before we start our discussion, let's take a look at something which will give us a brief overview on how war has changed over recent decades.
In the old days, it wasn't so very difficult. You'd see a line of soldiers coming across a border line and you'd know something was up, conflict was underway, or there'd be a massive explosion, an attack.
The problem with drones is that they're everywhere now.
Они вычисляют, определяют, находят, дают координаты.
Якщо є можливість засікти, летимо, шукаємо, вражаємо, тобто знищуємо.
We're now talking about modern, digital, agile threats, highly maneuverable, small, difficult to track and detect, difficult to counter.
It's clear that in the future, unmanned systems are going to be a very important part of the Alliance's capabilities.
We are at the doorstep of the future. We are experimenting now with certain unmanned systems.
It's truly impressive to see the different technologies that the nations bring and how they send their finest, brightest, and most motivated people as we work towards the future of unmanned systems.
We are at the beginning of a long journey where we will see unmanned systems mixing with traditional assets into perhaps even an unmanned future.
Okay, now that video gave us something of a backdrop to this conversation on future-proofing the alliance. A lot of imagery in there was from the Ukraine war, and I'd like to pick up on that straight away. Dr. Giegerich, not that long ago, Ukraine carried out a very complex drone attack, which was incredibly effective, Operation Spiderweb. Does that sort of strike tell us something more general about the type of warfare we're moving towards?
Well, I think what it tells us that we are in a phase where we see a fairly blistering pace of innovation, technological innovation in terms of operational concepts, in terms of tactics and methods that are applied. And I think that is something that, given that we're speaking about the future of the alliance, that is something that NATO will have to come to terms with. A few years ago, most of us would have said, a major upgrade to a defense capability happens every 6 years or so. Then some innovators came along and said, well, we'll bring that down to 6 months. Then we saw it come down to 6 weeks. And now, if you look at Ukraine, you see iterations of innovation taking place in less than that, in a matter of a couple of days. And I think that is one of the things that we need to come to terms with, just the pace and the speed with which things develop during conflict. And that is one of the reasons why it's so hard to prepare and predict, because you probably end up in a situation where you will not have gotten it exactly right when the fighting starts, and you need to maintain that agility to adapt as the fighting goes on.
And with that in mind, yeah, go ahead.
I just want to jump in on that. It's we think about these adaptation and learning cycles, particularly in an allied context, but let's not forget that Russia has been learning quickly too. And so as the war has been drawing on, their capabilities are improving. And so there are innovations and adaptations on our adversary side that we need to be accounting for and adapting to much more quickly than our current systems allow for.
And is NATO doing that? I mean, are the things that NATO has seen happening in Ukraine and the Russians adapting, have they kind of confirmed capabilities that NATO was already aware that it had to produce? Or is this kind of, oh, we really are playing catch up?
I think NATO has made a lot of progress, particularly since 2014 and then after 2022. There have been adaptations in terms of the command structures, defense plans, operational concepts, so on and so forth. What this summit is about driving home the resources needed to actually get to where we need to go, right? So all the plans, all the capabilities, all of those sorts of things that we've been thinking about, talking about, don't matter until you can resource them.
Yeah, but I feel like there's even something beyond that. One of the other speakers was talking about the need for a change to the DNA of these organizations. Like, what do you think on that level? Like, is the framework sufficient, fit for purpose to build onto?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, let's not forget, I mean, NATO is an alliance of 32 nations that come together and build political consensus, and has a military structure that has never been seen in human history. This is a powerful alliance that is capable of doing so much. This is exactly the space to be adapting. This is exactly the space to be building on the lessons learned from Ukraine. Can we be doing it faster, better? For sure. But if we didn't have NATO now, we would be trying to build it.
Okay. Olivier, you wanted to?
On this, I just wanted to say that the fact that it is an alliance allows us to learn from each other. So it also reduces some of the transaction costs. We don't have to reinvent all the time because we can actually learn from each other. This being said, there is always a challenge from learning from an ongoing conflict, which is that what's happening in Ukraine cannot be a carbon copy of how we should adapt, right? Because there's always this saying that military prepare for the last war. Why do we say that? It's because we have actually few data points of wars that are actually happening. So we tend to have this focus on the one that is ongoing, and we try to carbon copy it in our own defense systems. And this is where it becomes tricky, because what works in Ukraine may not work for our militaries, which have a slightly different doctrine, which may have different ways to fight. So the challenge is really to import what we think will be useful, but also hybrid it with the way we want to fight with the capabilities that we have. And this is where it becomes tricky, and it needs actually a lot of brain power to actually develop that.
Tricky is an understatement, let's be honest.
Yeah.
How on earth do you prepare for something like this?
Well, and there's another thing in there, precisely, because not only is the contemporary war landscape diverse, right? In your introduction, you already mentioned that the war between Russia and Ukraine, the war of attrition, is very different from the high-tech war between Israel and Iran. It's very different from the types of conflicts we see in Congo and Sudan. But there's also another reason that war's character changes and that military organizations need to adapt, because in the end it's a competitive duel. So you act, the opponent reacts. So if you prepare for one type of war, your opponent will see that you're preparing for that type of war and will try to beat you at your own game, and then do something differently.
And this is actually a perennial problem with a lot of defense establishments. The idea that we don't like that kind of war, like we don't like to do irregular warfare, we don't like to do we don't like to do stability operations, because that's stuff that we don't need to plan for. We need to focus on the high-end stuff. And what the current threat environment is showing us is that we don't have the luxury to choose what kind of war we're going to fight. We need to be prepared across the spectrum.
And that is expensive.
It's expensive.
That is expensive. If you want to prepare for everything, that's going to cost.
Yeah.
That's obviously one of the main conversations we're having here. But I think it also means, if you're a defense planner, it's very tempting to try and optimize for something. To try and find the thing that you're going to focus on. And I think the reality that we're all describing here is that is risky because we continue to be surprised. So we have that choice of being surprised or spending a lot of money. And I think right now the pendulum is swinging a bit away from specialization towards let's make sure we cover a broad spectrum.
Yeah, I mean, you need to be pragmatic about these things, though. I mean, if you get to the position where Article 5 is triggered and you've got all these 32 nations involved, do we need to move to the position where particular countries have developed specialisms in certain areas? One is great at tanks, I don't know, another is great at drones, another is...
I mean, that exists to a degree. I think...
do we double down on that?
Yeah, I think we double down to the degree that we identify areas of excellence and ask nations to take responsibility for that. But what is always going to be a tricky point for the alliance, if that specialization on military technical and capability terms leads to a division of risk, should the balloon go up, as it were, and a war to start. So one needs to make sure that there's cohesion and that these parts end up actually being something greater than the sum of their parts, and that I think that is NATO's task once more. But I think it is already the reality that obviously some nations are more focused on land forces. Some, I mean that degree of specialization I think is baked into the alliance already.
Yeah.
Also because of different threat perceptions, and we are an alliance of 32 nations, so I think it would make perfect sense for allies in the south to prepare perhaps more for crisis management operations, and allies up north and towards the east to focus more on high-end conventional deterrence, right? But I fully agree with Bastian. There needs to be synergy there, because otherwise you don't create more power. It's just
okay, so we need synergies, we need cohesion, we need more investment. What about in terms of like a macro kind of shift? Is there anything, if you had to kind of bet your career, let's say, on a big shift in the approach to warfare over the next 10 years, what would you say that shift would be?
Well, it will be unmanned.
Yeah, less people on the battlefield.
And so, will it be completely unmanned? I don't think so, for a variety of reasons. But there is a strategic shift. I mean, we have sensors everywhere. So that means that if you're on the battlefield, you're going to be shot at, right?
Yeah.
We have instant communication, right? So you can shoot everything, everywhere, all at once. Then you have the problem with electromagnetic contestation, right? Can you control your machines from afar? If you look at what's happening in Ukraine, because there are lessons to be learned there, of course. You see that they are interfering the electromagnetic spectrum.
Yeah.
So it's impossible to control the machines from afar. Right. And there's more reasons. Humans are going to be in the loop. So what I think you will see 10 years out, you will see combinations of what I call centaur teams, right? The Greek mythical creature of half man, half human, half horse. And so in the future, I think you will get human operators with, whether it's swarms or not, with unmanned systems surrounding it. So a key skill for the future military operator will be how to prompt these systems, how to control them in a way that aligns with our core ethical values.
Yeah.
And it creates, there is a technological driver for those center type of interactions, because we have the tech. So of course there is an edge in actually using them. But there's also a long-term demographic trend, which is that Western societies are becoming older. We have less and less young people, which are usually those who we send to fight, because they are probably the most physically fit for doing it. And in societies that are getting older, with less people able to fight, you need to fill in the gaps. And how are we going to do that? We're going probably to try to automate as many things as we can. So those technological trends, they push towards this human-machine interactions, but also the long-term demographic trends, they also signals in that direction, which raises a question. in terms of credibility of signaling whether we are willing to defend our interests. One way to signal that you are willing to defend is that there is a cost in it, and the cost is paid in blood. Are we equally credible when we say that we're going to defend primarily, or at least partly, with machines, where the costs are less high in terms of signals of what it means for society to actually pay for its defense? So there are battlefield results for these technological trends, but I think we should be very careful also to think about the strategic implications in terms of signaling deterrence and signaling that as societies we are willing to pay the cost of war to defend ourselves and not just delegate that to machines.
Yeah.
And I think sort of on the lower end of the technological spectrum, if you will, we also need to be prepared for protracted conflict. As militaries, as defense institutions, we like to think that we can get these wars done quickly, like Persian Gulf in 91. It doesn't work that way, right? And Russia has shown us that protracted war, that if that's that's probably the paradigm that we should be thinking about the most when we think about planning. It's a protracted conflict. And to pull that off, you need to be able to mobilize your society. It is a whole of society resistance and resilience effort that we're seeing in Ukraine. We need to be thinking about that in terms of what NATO can provide, and in terms of the frameworks for whole of society mobilization, thinking about things much more strategically in terms of how industry and the defense industry, defense planners, and other parts of society can integrate into whole of society resilience and resistance plans. We can't exclusively focus on the high-tech stuff if we think about the future of war. We must think about our people. We must think about how our societies can be quickly mobilized to deter or defend.
Yeah, but I mean, doing that on the eastern flank is a lot easier than doing it on the western flank of NATO. How do you go about?
Part of it is a communications issue, right? I mean, as the point was made earlier today, I think several times, if we do not mobilize our societies to meet this challenge, our sons are, our children are going to be sent to these front lines. These are interconnected threats, and I don't think that case has been made clearly enough.
Yeah.
I think another dimension of the story that needs to be told is that just because a conflict the front line might be along the eastern flank, it doesn't mean that it won't affect all of us. Russia is a brutal actor. There are tens of thousands of war crimes that have been documented, and that's just scratching the surface. There's at least 20,000 missing, kidnapped children that Russia has kidnapped, Ukrainian children. So this is an actor that is violating the laws of war. That will be a threat to NATO as an alliance, all of our societies. This is not something that we can just pick and choose what we're going to fight against and what we're going to mobilize against. We're all in this together.
Yeah. And bearing in mind the level of that threat, I mean, obviously the US is geographically very far away from Russia, but what is its take when it comes to thinking about the future of war? Because you're ex-Pentagon.
Well, in the US, there's many takes.
All the answers.
I've got all the answers.
Give us all the answers.
All right. Look, the Pentagon, the US defense establishment is looking at a chaotic world, right? And multiple administrations have agreed that the challenge that we're really facing is one of great power competition. Russia and China are key threats. So is Iran, North Korea. This axis, they're learning from each other. They're cooperating with each other. One of the reasons that Russia has been able to sustain the fight is because of North Korean and Chinese enablers, right? So, or an enablement. So this is an extremely complex challenge. I think the U.S. is trying to think about how to manage this environment. And that's why, it's not just the Trump administration that's been asking for an increase in defense expenditure. This has been an argument that's been going on for decades. Yeah. And it's wonderful to see that now the alliance is stepping up because we're running out of time. Our adversaries, again, are learning from each other. They're getting better. We don't have time to mess around.
And when it comes to the personnel and who's going to have to be involved in this over the next decade, you alluded to it a little bit there in terms of, future military cadets are going to have to be very good at writing prompts, I don't know, like ChatGPT style to manage drones. But what are the new skill sets that military personnel of the future are going to have?
I think going back to that technology conversation that we had a few minutes ago, I think the reality is we will need both. We will need some people who pick up a gun and go and fight, and then we will need people who are very advanced, bring very advanced technological skills to their service in the armed forces. So I think it's important to understand that it's not a replacing or an either or. We need to be able to do both, and that actually for armed forces is quite difficult because what you're talking about is you're expanding the skill set that you need to include, and you need to create new career path for specialists who might not come through the normal traditional path of being trained in fairly basic military skills before they adopt a specialism. You might need to now bring people in from other walks of life who want to serve and who bring a skill set, but they're not actually interested in what traditionally would come before that in the armed forces. So opening up to that and creating ways to for these people to have a successful career in the armed forces, I think that's going to be a challenge. It's not so much about a particular skill; it's about making sure that armed forces can integrate that.
Yeah. And if we talk a little bit about how ready NATO is to pick up the ball on this, to prepare for the future. Right now, I mean, the Ukraine is, I understand, producing something like 150,000 drones a month. They are the engine of ingenuity, even more than that, the engine of ingenuity and innovation when it comes to warfare right now in Europe, mainland Europe. The rest of the European defence industry just is woefully behind.
I'm afraid they are, right? I mean, I recently published a book, The War of Tomorrow, in which we look at the state of the field, and we also look at, and this is why the role of societies is so critical, after we have literally ignored the possibility of war over, I would almost say, 30 years. Yeah. We just couldn't fathom that it could be a reality. We have essentially defense industries that are very fragmented, that are very small scale, that are not able to churn out the quantities of material that we need.
Yeah.
And that's sort of on the industry side. But then on the societal side, you also see that there is a huge disconnect between society and the military. And I think in the West, in Western Europe at least, we have taken that division too far. And so that means that citoyens, are no longer feel that they're a member of a community that they also need to serve and to protect.
At least not the ones on the eastern flank, perhaps do, more so.
Right, I was talking about Western Europe here.
But how far are the Chinese and the Russians on this then, Olivier?
Well, I'm not an expert on China's military.
I appreciate that.
So I will not talk about China because it's not my field at all. But what certainly we see about Russia is a society that has been now mobilized for war, in the sense that the regime has radicalized its discourse against the West in general, the collective West, and has been very good at doing two things. The first one has been to providing incentives to actually go to the military, work in the defense industry, which is why we, as NATO intelligence services, tend to assess that the Russian military will be able to rebuild its capabilities within
What sorts of incentives are those?
So incentives will be, if you join the military, you will get pensions, a large amount of money. If you are killed on the battlefield, your family will receive a lump sum of money, which actually is quite significant by Russian living standards. And also, if you work in the Russian defense industry, of course, you get higher salaries because now there is a lot of orders and production going on. So the regime has been really good at incentivizing and mobilizing part of the society to go to war while shielding the rest of the society from the negative consequence of the war itself in terms of sustaining their standards of living. So this is why we have not seen massive disruptions of the political scene in Russia. That's one of the reasons, because most Russians don't feel the war as much as they should probably.
But what about the technology itself? Is that something that NATO feels particularly threatened by, Russian technology?
Well, I think again, Kathleen made the point earlier. They are innovating as well, and they have shown some incredible speed there recently as well. So if you looked at Russia a few years ago, unmanned systems actually was a weakness, a clear weakness, UAVs in particular, and they clearly have done something to turn that around.
Licensing under Iranian license.
Starting under Iranian license, but then I think they've gone beyond that now. So I think that is worrying there. Russian electronic warfare capabilities were always formidable to a degree. They've done that on China. I think there as well. I mean, China has broken what used to be the U.S. monopoly on stealth a few years ago on stealth aircraft. It has air-to-air weapon systems that I would say can compete with the best that NATO allies can produce. So there are areas where really I think the paradigm is that the technological advantage that NATO and the US in particular felt that has been eroding. So that the trend is going in the wrong direction from, I think, all of our perspectives.
And if I could just add 2 fingers, it will not be that bad if Russia didn't have that much of a mass and stocks of ammunitions, which we don't have right now within NATO, right?
That is a critical point, right? Yeah. So as we think about technologies and future technologies, a lot of the conversations until now have been really focused on really expensive, exquisite systems, right? And what Ukraine is telling us is that mass matters. You need
€1,000 drones. Wreaking havoc.
Right. And so when we think about the deterrence and defense of Europe, it's not just high-end, exquisite capabilities that can do whiz-bang stuff. It's also like, you need to have ammunition. You need to have 155 ammunition. You need to be able to do some of the basics.
Company, I'm probably more interested in selling the high-end, high-tech, expensive 350 million F-35 or whatever.
I think it depends on the company, right? And I think it also depends on business models, right?
True.
I mean,
and who gets to order what they want, right? I mean, the states foot the bill in the end, right? So.
Yeah. But I mean, thinking about that, the paradigm of defense acquisition has largely been dominated by effectiveness and just-in-time logistics. So basically, we want to have them buy the minimum required, and we want to do it just as we need it, right? It's like Amazon Prime for defense. When we look at the future, we need to have stockpiles. We need to have depth of capability. We need to be able to keep throwing things at the enemy, not just think about the war being over within 30 days. It's going to be a long haul, or at least need to prepare for that. So mass matters. Some of the low-end stuff really also matters. It's how do we integrate these things together as defense institutions so we can have meaningful effect across these spectrums.
And this is part of the difference. If we're credible about the ability to sustain the fight, we are much less likely to actually have to go into the fight.
That's right. That's right. Production is deterrence, as they say. But I think on the mass point, I think what you will hear around the summit, and at least in our conversations, is that sense of what we need is affordable mass. So in other words, create cheaper systems that can be produced at scale fast. So because the economy of war in a way has changed, and Ukraine is an indicator of that. I fully agree with others who have said, when NATO fights, it will fight differently. But nevertheless, the war in Ukraine is an indicator that if you try to counter cheap modes of attack with very expensive equipment, you will run out of money and that equipment quite quickly. And I think that high-intensity nature that we see there means you will lose a lot of stuff. You will unfortunately also lose a lot of people. And so mobilizing on the production side and on the societal side is going to be key, I think.
Quantity is a quality in itself. But there's one thing. Once we've restored conventional deterrence, I mean, it's very likely that the Russians will find another way. Right, and this is, they often allude to this by the term hybrid threats, but I was struck by the fact that this afternoon, or this morning, the train lines to Schiphol, our national airport, were sabotaged.
It's something
likely
that's being
sabotage, right? But
looked into.
But they've been conducting
But it could very well be
operations across,
state
like,
actor.
And so
it's
if you
real.
look at Russia's hybrid threat operations, we've been monitoring that at my institute, and we see two disconcerting trends. One, we see an increase in the quantity. So from 9 in 2020 to more than 50 in 2025. And we see a clear shift from the virtual to the physical domain.
Yeah.
Underwater sea cable sabotage, spoofing of GPS signals. If I speak to pilots, if they fly, they can't always locate where they are at.
Yeah.
You see it at attempts to murder CEOs of...
Okay, without the last one, the murdering of CEOs, though, hybrid threat operations, is this something NATO should be doing? Is NATO already doing this?
Is it they should be doing? They're definitely involved in it. In 2010, they adopted hybrid threats as an official term.
Right.
There's the notion of hybrid threat response teams. There are certain metrics, specifically in the context of resilience, of how you can protect your vital infrastructure. So these are things. But what I find important is also from an Article 5 perspective, is that at some point these hybrid threats are going to cross into conventional threats. And so the example is that in 2014, MH17 with 196 Dutch citizens aboard was shut down with a Russian system, right? And so the Dutch, this is a different period. It's only 11 years ago, but we weren't going to talk about Article 5 and these sorts of things. Now, there was a plot, and this was in the open source literature, I think in the New York Times of December 2024, in which the American intelligence services found out that the GRU, the Russian intelligence secret service, was planning to blow up a plane with not FedEx but HCL packages. And so they went to the Kremlin and told them, hey, if this is going to go
this
through,
would trigger.
it's a casus belli, right? This is going to trigger Article 5. So I think there's definitely a role for NATO, especially because there is a risk with actual escalation into large scale.
Yeah.
If I can just say about that, we will never be able to deter all threats, right? I mean, we are in a situation of hostility with Russia. Russia is going to try to hurt us.
Right.
That is going to happen, right? We cannot deter all threats, but we can probably contain the level of hostility to those kind of actions so that they do not cross the threshold.
Exactly.
And that's the challenge, right? We probably have to accept a degree of we are going to miss some of them. But it also means that the hostility remain located at that level of subversion, sabotage, which all in all is better than an all-out conflict.
I think it. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just saying that, one of the objectives though is to push things as closely as possible. Like hybrid warfare is this construct in which our adversaries are blurring the lines between war and peace, right? Deliberately so, to destabilize us, and so thinking about these questions of what triggers Article 5 is very serious business. Our adversaries know that we have these bright, in our minds, some bright lines between what is war and what is not, right? And the laws of war, all that the literature that accompanies that. And so it's in their interest to sort of play with those lines as much as possible. That creates a vulnerability. But as you said, NATO, its member states have been working on this, right? They've been thinking about how
are we in
to
a
do this.
reality where NATO, I don't know, also needs to play with the blurring of those lines?
The interesting, from Putin's perspective, we are doing.
We are doing.
Yeah.
From his perspective,
We're providing Ukraine with weapons, ever more expensive weapons that can strike deep. But I think it behooves us to think about that and to also understand how our adversary perceives that, precisely because of the reason for escalation management.
I think again, one needs to distinguish that a little bit. There are methods of hybrid warfare, surveillance and so on, that I'm pretty sure is fair game. But there are other things that I think would put NATO in a difficult spot from a policy and also from a values point of view. But I think the things we're talking about, they point to the fact that there are different kinds of vulnerabilities we need to deal with here, and some of them we will not be able to get rid of. You earlier asked, how prepared is NATO to do some of these things? In defense industrial terms, we talked about, okay, there is a window that we need to try and make smaller. We need to try and move faster so that window of vulnerability closes, of not being able to produce enough ammunition, of not being agile enough to lean into these new technologies. There is a vulnerability on the hybrid side that you can reduce by, through resilience measures, through being prepared, through mapping critical infrastructure, to knowing who is in charge of that. Very, very often, the first line of defense there will not be NATO. It will sometimes not even be the nation state where that is located in, but it might be the private sector or someone else. But even if you do that, there will be vulnerability. We won't be able to shut this down completely. So I think the goal needs to be to reduce this to the level of a nuisance rather than an actual threat. And I think that's probably where most NATO nations
engaging
are.
with all of society as part of the
exactly.
planning. It needs to be much more of a central feature of how we do business moving forward.
Okay, before we continue, let me see if there are any questions from our audience. It's nice to bring in you guys here at some point. Yeah, we've got a question here. Any others? You ready? I'd like to see one question from it's always this side. Let's see any questions from this side. Okay.
Happy to represent this side. Yes, I'm Davis Allison from the Hague Center for Strategic Studies. I'll try to bring a couple things together, but we've talked about the topic of personnel and mobilization and mass. And if we're talking about the future of war, especially amongst NATO countries, two challenges that we see or really one challenge is the personnel one. We've talked about peacetime mobilization. What do you do outside of the context of conscription to mobilize in peacetime? And then secondarily, especially here in the western part of Europe, populations are aging. The average age in 2050, talking the future of war in Europe, is going to be about 48 years old. How does that circle start to get squared when we talk about whole of society?
Thanks very much. Okay, who'd like to take...
I'll start. I think there are a couple of things one needs to look at. Technology we already talked about, and I think, for example, if you follow the UK debate, you see that there quite quickly, where the chief of the army basically is saying we will not have more people, but we have a more lethal force, and technology is the way among the ways to get there. So that definitely is part of the answer. But I think there's also a task.
Even they're looking to recruit.
Well, they're looking to, but they're finding that quite hard, and there is no. There's no ambition to grow the force structure significantly in the UK right now, because, frankly, it'll be very difficult to do. And there are other ways to create a more lethal force, which is the buzzword that is flying around for some time now. But I think there are reserve models that one needs to look at again beyond conscription model. There are reserve models.
And what would that look like?
Well, I mean,
not conscription.
I think you again. We talked a little bit earlier about how do you bring in people with new skills that the armed forces will need. I think reserve constructs are actually quite good to do that, either in fields that are technology driven or that just have specialisms that you can find in civilian life, and then you need if you then go back to where we were earlier, and if you then construct defense as a whole of society task, not just the task for the armed forces, you can, I think, have a conversation with the private sector, with others in society, that there is a role there that will be partial, that might need to be mobilized, that might require a support structure that won't be cheap, but nevertheless that gives you the ability to ramp up and meet some of these challenges. I mean, there are other factors.
But you can also, not just for support, but also for the spear. I mean, I've looked at this in the Dutch context and realized that our Dutch armed forces are about 40,000, 42,000, without reserves, 6,000 reserves. In a bad month, the Russians lose 40,000 forces. So both from an affordability perspective, but also from a demographic scarcity perspective, I think it would make perfect sense to have, not conscription, but you could have a voluntary service year when you're 18. In the Netherlands, small country, we have 200,000 young boys and girls, young men and women. If only 5% of them do that service year and then enter into the reserves, then after 5 years you have another 50k. After 10 years you have another 100k
I feel like
reserves.
we're too soft for this in Europe. I remember in the UK elections, Rishi Sunak flew a kite, as they say, like threw this idea out there for something not too dissimilar from what you said, and he was laughed out of the room. You know?
Well, not here. Interestingly enough, and we don't have that in British imperial history.
Oh, maybe it's that.
But I also think that sort of the security environment is worsening. And it also perhaps depends on the sort of conditions that you offer.
Yeah.
Can I also just footstep on something? Let's look to women. Right? I mean, it's 50% of the population. In the U.S., they are 17.5% of the active duty force and upwards of 25% of the reserve force. One of the reasons the Army was able to meet its recruitment goals after many years of missing them was because women stepped up. Women are here. We're doing the job. There's things that can be done to make it easier to do the job, like body armor that actually fits women's bodies. Turns out we are differently shaped than you do.
Who knew?
Right?
You don't even need exoskeletons, just body armor.
No exoskeletons needed. But there's very simple things that can be done that just let women get the job done, that can absolutely help contribute to the solution set and also help us with whole of society mobilization. It's very simple. I wish we would pay a little bit more attention to that.
Yeah, is that being discussed?
I would also question your premise of we are too soft for this, in the sense that, okay, in a specific societal context, somebody willing to join the military might be laughed at, but not in another one. And it's a matter of making prestigious or at least socially rewarded career paths that make it attractive for young men and women to actually mobilize in one way or another, joining the force or not. And one way to do that, to, for example, make a whole of society approach is make it relevant for society. Defense industry are relatively highly qualified jobs that we are probably not going to outsource to China. So growing up those kind of defense industry, it makes sure that more people have a stake in defense at large. So there are ways to creating that ecosystem that makes defense less, I will say, disingenuous or at least more prestigious in social terms. Until very recently, the banking industry in their ECG criteria had defense at the complete bottom alongside casinos and prostitutions and tobacco, right? So of course, no banks will want to invest in the defense industry. So there are also some things we can do in terms of how we mobilize the massive capitals that exist around to invest in defense, that in turn will create more jobs, will create more people who have a stake in maintaining this kind of whole society approach.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you.
Well, and just, you know, our societies may not be interested in war, but war is very much interested in our societies, right? And so making that case more clearly, I think that this is the moment that demands that case. We need to make defense an understood actor in this ecosystem of our societies. And Olivier and others came up, you know, some brilliant strategies for elevating the profile, but we have to do that.
Yeah. I mean, in your book, Dr. Sweijs, you mentioned ordinary citizens do have a role to play in war. I mean, is this outside of conscription and reservists and so on? And how can you expand on that?
Sure. If I look at conflict theaters around the world, and we've mentioned a few, you see that the people are central, whether it's as combatants, professional or conscripted, whether it's non-combatants as they're being targeted, or whether it's as supporters because they offer political support or keep the economy and the industry functioning. And so if you apply that to lessons for NATO, it's not just about military readiness, but it's also about societal readiness. And that involves, going to... I mean, we don't want to militarize our societies. Let's also be crystal clear about that.
Yeah.
But since war was such a sort of an alien phenomenon, it does make sense to, in primary schools and high schools, at universities, to start teaching again about what war is, where it comes from, how it's waged, how it can be ended. It also involves, going back to sort of bringing in larger swaths of society. It's not just about sort of servicemen, whether it's sailors or airmen or infantry. It's also about having cyber specialists, right? Having surgeons, having car mechanics, having people who can repair the trains to Schiphol, so you can all go home tomorrow or the day after.
I had the opportunity to visit Kyiv in August 2023, and it was nighttime when we got there, and we were taken to this building in the outskirts of town, and we went up an elevator, really close quarters, and up some plywood onto the roof, and we met Ukrainian Supreme Court judges who were up there every night shooting down drones with rifles. Everybody was doing their part.
Yeah.
Whatever that, when you look at what happened in Irpin, you had 200 dudes and dudettes holding off Russian forces. They stole whatever they could. They would have thrown shoes at them. This is the cable guy in the gardener. To say that it has to be the military that does this is not true. It has to be all of us.
But then, what's the difference between what you're describing and a militarized society? You said we absolutely don't want that. Where's the red line?
Okay, great. So. Well, the red line would be, I'm thinking of Sparta, right? You would just bring in the people from when they're 9, you get the military training.
Even Russia nowadays.
You would have
this is a militarized society.
You would have competition on television, who's better at shooting and fighting. You would have playgrounds that look like tanks. I mean, you would have conscription. I mean, this would follows them. So I think there's a difference, but we're not there yet.
Okay.
No, we're pretty far from it. And I think, I keep getting back to it, but it's also part of deterrence. If we are signaling to a likely adversary who already, Russia already thinks that Western countries are a bunch of degenerates who are not willing to fight for their own interest and defense country. If we keep signaling that we are actually not doing that, well, we are just inviting further aggression, right? So it's about compensating and also signaling the fact that we are not Russia in the sense that we are not teaching 12-year-old kids how to shoot and how to be brainwashed in terms of their national history, and we are not also creating fake enemies that are being taught in school, because this is a militarized society. This is Russia right now. But there is also an increase in terms of preparedness and awareness of the fact that if sadly we have to fight, it's not only the military who is going to be part of it, it's going to be the entirety of society. So it's not even a sweet spot, it's two different things, right? Being a militarized society and an aware society is two different things.
Okay. Well, listen, I'd like to, I was searching for a way to kind of bring this to a close, and let's go with this. Before we round up, I'd love to go around the table and ask each of you to finish this sentence, okay? The next war will be won by whoever masters, and then finish off the sentence. What do you think? What do we need to master? Very short, because we have to round up.
Management.
Okay.
Actually being able to pull off whole of society, resilient, these things we've been talking about, means that we actually have to build the systems necessary to integrate it all and field it all.
Okay, clear, thanks.
I will say deterrence, because the best war is the one you don't have to fight.
Oh, great. Good sound. That's very good. Very quotable. Yeah.
The will. I would go for the will. It's about the passion and the will to build up the means to outsmart your adversary, to continue to fight, to stay in the fight, to impose your will, to defeat your enemy, or at least to get him to surrender on the terms that you want him.
Yeah, so political and amongst ordinary people. Okay.
I'm going to go back to where I was before and say it's those who maintain the ability to adapt when it turns out that all their assumptions about war were wrong.
Okay. Yeah, adaptation. Okay, well, listen, we will leave it there. Thank you very much, all of you. That's a wrap for day one of NATO's Public Forum. You've heard a lot. Hopefully some of it surprising, some of it inspiring. Tomorrow, the spotlight shifts as NATO leaders meet face to face. And we'll be right here at the Public Forum, caffeinated and curious with more brilliant speakers. Until then, debrief, debate, and above all, hydrate. Like your credibility depends on it. See you back here tomorrow. Goodbye.